The first thing I felt was the cold, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with metal chains biting into my wrists as I lay on a filthy stall floor, contractions shredding through me like knives. The old barn around me smelled of rust, unwashed men, and the stink of fear, soaked into the wood from the countless others who had been dragged here before me. My body was shaking uncontrollably, sweat slicking my skin, but the men leaning casually against the stall door didn't care that I was giving birth on dirty, straw-like livestock. They hadn't cared since the moment I'd been trafficked to this remote ranch months ago, after being promised honest work and safety. Instead, they drugged me on arrival, took every document, every belonging, every shred of identity I had, and told me I was useful only if I could produce. I hadn't known I was pregnant then. They had. They'd been watching me for weeks like I was a broodmare on a breeding schedule, counting down the days until my body became valuable in their eyes. When the final contraction ripped through me, something inside me nearly snapped in half. My child slid into the world with a thin, trembling cry. I reached for him with shaking hands, desperate to pull him close, to protect him from the monsters in the doorway, but a boot slammed against my wrist and shoved me backward. One of the men lifted my newborn by the back of his blanket, inspecting him like he was buying produce at a market. "Strong lungs," he said casually. "Healthy enough." My baby's cries pierced the air, but they didn't bother cutting the cord properly. They tore it, tied it with some oily string, then placed him in a wooden crate not fit for a dog. I crawled toward him, blood pooling between my legs, but another man grabbed my ankle chain and yanked me backward, scraping my skin raw. "Stop it," he barked. "You're done. They only paid for the goods, not the show." "Please," I begged, voice cracking like broken glass. "Let me hold him, please, just once." The boss, a thick-necked man with a scar dragging down his jaw, crouched in front of me and grabbed my chin so hard I felt something pop. "Listen carefully," he hissed. "You're not a mother. You're a product, and you were sold before you even went into labor." My stomach lurched violently. I tried to scream, but he slapped me so hard the barn spun around me. I tasted blood. Somewhere behind me, my baby cried again, weaker this time, the sound shredding me from the inside. The boss snapped his fingers. "Clean her up. The buyer's on his way." They dragged me through the barn by the chains, my legs too weak to stand, leaving a trail of blood behind me. They dunked me in an icy water trough, scrubbing me like I was a dirty animal. One man laughed as he held my head underwater for a second too long. And when I came up gasping, I saw my baby's crate rocked where he'd been placed on a crate in the corner. He wasn't crying now, just whimpering weakly. I tried to crawl to him, but a fist slammed into my ribs so hard something cracked. "Move again and I'll break both legs before we sell you," the man growled. They forced me into a thin, torn dress, still wet and clinging to my skin, then chained my wrists behind my back and shoved me against the stall wall. My vision blurred as the barn doors creaked open and sunlight slanted across the dirt floor. A group of men entered. One, short and round with greedy eyes, was clearly the buyer. The way he scanned me made bile rise in my throat. The other stood behind him, tall and silent, a long coat draped over broad shoulders, face hidden under a dark cowboy hat. But it was the buyer whose gloved fingers grabbed my chin, turning my face left and right like he was checking livestock. "She'll do," he said. "And the baby?" "Package deal," the boss answered. 40,000. She's young, compliant, and now that she's delivered, she'll work harder. 40 is steep, the buyer muttered. She's bruised. She's bleeding, and she's barely standing. But fertile, the boss said with a disgusting grin. And the baby's healthy. That alone is worth 20. I gagged, coughing blood. My legs trembled. The buyer turned to the crate and lifted my baby by the blanket. My heart squeezed painfully as my child whimpered, face scrunched, fists weakly trying to fight the cold. "He'll fetch a good price," the buyer said. The tall man in the coat shifted slightly, his jaw clenching. His blue eyes, the only part of him I could see, narrowed. The buyer handed the boss a thick wad of cash. "Done, load her in the truck. And keep the child quiet." "Wait," the tall cowboy finally spoke, his voice low and sharp. Everyone turned toward him. He stepped forward, shadows shifting off his face. He was rugged, unshaven, scarred, someone who'd seen death but wasn't afraid of it. "You selling her?" he asked. "Her and the baby?" "Not to you," the buyer snapped. She's mine. Paid for. The cowboy's hand drifted toward the revolver on his hip. I wasn't asking, the boss growled, stepping between them. Back off, stranger. This isn't your business. It is now, the cowboy said. I'm buying her freedom. Silence slammed into the barn. Even the dust froze in the air. The buyer laughed shrill. You think you can waltz in here and take what I paid for? The cowboy's eyes were icy. Name your price. She's not for sale to you. Everything is for sale, the cowboy said, flicking a wad of money onto the ground at the boss's feet. Except human dignity. But since you've forgotten that, I'll pay whatever it takes to remind you. The boss's men bristled. One raised his rifle. Before he could aim, the cowboy moved like lightning, kicking the gun out of the man's hands and pointing his revolver directly at the buyer's skull. Touch either of them, he said softly, and you'll be dead before you hit the ground. My breath stalled. My baby whimpered again. The cowboy flicked his eyes toward me just once, and something in his expression softened before he returned his deadly stare to the men in front of him. Now, he said, the woman, the baby, give them to me. The buyer trembled. Fine, 10,000 more. The cowboy tossed another stack of bills without looking. Done. The boss threw up his hands in frustration but didn't dare argue. Release her, he barked at his men. The chains fell from my wrists, but I was too weak to stand. The cowboy holstered his gun, crossed the distance in 3 long strides, and lifted me into his arms as if I weighed nothing. I flinched, expecting pain, but instead he cradled me gently, shielding my broken ribs against his chest. I've got you, he murmured. You're safe now. He picked up my baby with his free hand, holding him with a tenderness I had never seen in my life. The buyer snarled, If you walk out with them, you're a dead man. The cowboy turned, eyes burning with ice-cold fury. Try me. He pushed through the barn doors, carrying us both. But before he reached the horse tied outside, a gunshot exploded from behind us. The men had changed their minds. They'd rather kill us all than let us go. The cowboy didn't hesitate. He swung me and the baby behind a wooden trough as bullets tore through the air, splintering boards. He drew his revolver and fired back with terrifying precision, hitting one man's leg, another shoulder. Stay down, he ordered me, covering my body with his own. My baby wailed, terrified. The cowboy gritted his teeth. Hold on, little one. I'm getting you out of here. He fired again, ducked, then gripped me tightly. We're running on 3, he whispered. 1, 2, 3. He lifted both me and the baby and sprinted toward the horse. Bullets whizzed past. One grazed his arm. Blood bloomed across his sleeve, but he didn't slow. He threw me onto the saddle, placed the baby in my arms, and mounted behind us. Hold him tight, he said, then snapped the reins. The horse exploded forward. The gunfire faded behind us, swallowed by the wind and the pounding of hooves as we disappeared into the shadows of the trees. The horse didn't stop for miles. Branches lashed against us, dust rising in thick clouds as the cowboy drove the stallion deeper into the forest, twisting through ravines and streams until even the echoes of gunfire vanished completely. My baby whimpered weakly against my chest, and I held him as close as my trembling arms allowed. Finally, the cowboy slowed the horse near a small cabin hidden between towering pines. He jumped down and lifted me carefully, his hands gentle despite the blood dripping from his forearm. You're safe here, he whispered, carrying me inside. The cabin smelled of cedar and old firewood. He laid me on a bed and wrapped a blanket around my shaking body before rushing to warm water, bandages, and a tin cup. You're losing blood, he muttered, voice tight with worry. Too much. He cleaned my wounds, his touch surprisingly soft for someone who'd just taken down armed traffickers. When he reached my ribs, I winced and he froze. I'm sorry, he said quietly. They hurt you bad, I swallowed. My baby, he needs... The cowboy nodded and ran to heat milk on the stove. He fed the baby with a dropper, his big hand steady despite everything. Watching him cradle my newborn with such gentleness sent a shock of emotion through me so strong I nearly cried. He looked at the baby as if he were something sacred, not a product, not a price tag, not a piece of property. What's his name? He asked softly. I never got to give him one, I whispered, tears spilling. They took him from me the moment he was born. His jaw tightened. Then you'll give him one now. On your terms. Before I could speak, distant voices echoed through the forest. My heart seized. They found us, I gasped. The cowboy grabbed his rifle, checking the chamber. They won't touch you, he said. Not while I'm breathing. He pushed a dresser in front of the door, then looked at me, really. Looked, and something fierce and protective flared in his eyes. I didn't just buy your freedom, he said softly. I'm fighting for it. Footsteps crunched outside. Men whispered. The boss shouted from the trees, You think you can hide? She belongs to us. The cowboy stepped to the door and shouted back, She belongs to no one. Not anymore. Give her up, the boss snarled, and we'll make your death quick. Come take her, the cowboy said. If you're that stupid. Gunfire erupted. The cabin walls shook. My baby cried, and my body curled instinctively over him. I sobbed, torn between terror and rage. The cowboy fired back through a crack in the shutters, hitting one man, then another. More shouting. More gunshots. Colt! I cried, because I finally realized his name was carved on his saddle. He didn't turn. Stay down, he said, voice steady even as bullets ripped through wood. I'm ending this. Minutes stretched into brutal eternity. Then suddenly silence. No footsteps. No shouting. No gunfire. The door creaked open. Colt stood there bloodied, bruised, breathing hard but alive. It's done, he murmured, eyes scanning me and the baby with relief so raw it softened every line of his hardened face. He shut the door behind him and slid to the ground, exhausted. I reached out with a shaking hand. You saved us. He looked at me, and something unspoken passed between us, something fierce, something impossible, something undeniable. I'd do it again, he said, 1,000 times. He moved closer and gently placed his hand over mine, making sure not to touch the bruises. You're free now, he whispered. Both of you! I stared at him through tears. Why? Colt met my gaze with something that made my heart twist. Because no woman deserves to be caged, he said. And no child deserves to be born into chains. My baby stirred between us. Colt glanced down at him, a rare softness in his eyes. He's strong, he murmured, just like his mother. The fire crackled in the cabin as the night wrapped around us. My newborn slept against my chest, safe for the first time, and Colt stayed beside us, silent, steady, protective. I didn't know what tomorrow held. All I knew was that the man who'd shouted, I'm buying her freedom, hadn't simply saved our lives, he'd given us a future.